Welcome back to Hot Rod Guy Garage. This is going to be a DIY on rear drum brakes on your 96 up. Well, let's back up a little bit. These drum brakes are going to be the same from 89 all the way up to 01 for the hatchback models. Now, if you have a sedan, it's going to be different, but it will be similar. So watch along with me and we'll do some rear drum brakes on this. So guys, you're going to do rear drum brakes on your Metro, right? So the first thing you want to do is you want to jack this car up safely. Now there's a lift point right in the middle of the car, up under the back. I'll show you that. You're also going to need to remove the rear wheels. And I also highly suggest putting your jack stands under the body of the car to help support the jack, just in case, something fails. Just try to keep yourself safe. So basically, right here you can see this nub right here. This is your rear lift point for the center of the car. Now, if you're going to do it one side at a time, you can go under the control arm over here or over here. But for this, I'm jacking up both sides because I'm replacing both sides. So, next thing you'll need, a socket and an impact or a breaker bar of some sorts. On 89 through 94 cars, your lug nuts will be 17 millimeter. On your 96 up, they'll be 19 millimeter. Let's get these wheels off. And if you're missing your lug nut caps, an 18 millimeter socket works well. Well, that's one wheel off. Let's get rid of that. So once your wheel's gone, you're going to see a little dust cap right here. Now, the sedans, this drum slides off. On your hatchback cars, you have a big nut here, and you have to remove this dust cap. What I like to use is a screwdriver and a hammer, and just lightly try to get under this edge, enough I can pop that cap off. So, you don't want to get wild beating on this thing, so just a light tap like that, most of the time you can get under the edge, and that cap will pop right off. So now, you're going to need to get this big nut off the center here. The easiest thing to do is if you've got a small screwdriver to bend this little locking tab up a little bit, and you can use either a breaker bar or an impact to remove this nut. So let's get to that. And you just want to bend that tab up enough it unlocks. So your socket's generally going to be a 22 millimeter. And it shouldn't be mega tight, guys. I literally use my 1/4 inch impact driver here to remove this nut. And you'll have a nut. And there's a washer in here. And most of the time this stuff just won't slide off. And it should. So that tells me there is a rust lip inside this drum. Now, there's two ways you can go about this. You can put a slide hammer on it, or sometimes you can just work it a little bit and it'll slide right off. I don't know if you can see in here, but this drum's got a pretty good lip, and we're going to replace these anyway later on in this episode. So, it's real important when you do drum brakes to take a reference photo of how things are installed on the car. And basically you want to go back together in the same way. Now if you have a long shoe, it's going to go in the back, and a short shoe, it will go in the front. Most of the time on these small brakes like this, they're going to be both the same thickness. But if you do have a thin and a thick shoe, the thick one will go on the rear side. So let's get busy. Now alright guys, I know drum brakes are intimidating for a lot of people, but you can literally do these with just a few hand tools. A pair of side cutters, or dikes as they're called, a pair of channel locks, and a flathead screwdriver. Now, if you're going to change wheel cylinders like I am, you're going to need a 10mm wrench or a 10mm socket to get that stuff off. So, let's get to it. So guys, this is going to be real time here. You can literally take these springs and just kind of, you don't want to pinch this to cut it, but you just want enough to get a light grip, and you can pull that spring off right there. Now, it's easy to lay this stuff out on the ground in the orientation that you removed it. These side clips right here, most of the time you can push them in like this, turn the little pin from the back side, and this stuff comes off. Now, you may notice I didn't take the top spring off. There's a reason for that, and I'll show you that here in a minute. But literally, this stuff's just going to come loose like this. And at this point, you got your shoes loose with that top spring there. And the reason why I said I'll show you here in a minute how to remove it, you have a return holding spring right here on your adjuster. It's right here on the bottom. Just a little bitty spring. And that's what keeps that rod onto your parking brake arm. So it's easier to take it apart like this and to reassemble it in the same manner. So basically, if you're at that point, your shoe comes right off, and you'll notice that you have a clip right here on your shoe. That's what holds your parking brake arm in. So most of the time, you can either use a screwdriver or a pair of channel locks like these, and you can just pop this clip up like this, and it comes right off. So make sure you don't lose that clip. And at this point, you're right here. And if you're like me, you want to clean this backing plate up, and a wire brush works good for that. So I'm going to clean this backing plate up, and I'll get this wheel cylinder off here, and we'll go from there. And alright guys, I wire brushed that back plate off a little bit, but before I clean it up well, I'm going to go ahead and replace this wheel cylinder. Now, I did get these from Rock Auto. I am not sponsored by them, but these were a considerable amount cheaper than the parts store. So let's flip this around. I'll show you how to replace the wheel cylinder, because more than likely you're going to need these too. So you might want to go ahead and order them when you order your stuff. So guys, if you'll notice, this wheel cylinder is super clean. You know, it almost looks new. The reason for that is I've cleaned these up before, and because they were froze up, and tried to revive them. But sometimes when you're taking a car that don't, you know, necessarily have a bunch of miles on stuff, but it sits a long time, you're going to get rust in here because brake fluid's hydroscopic. But here on the back side, and I know this is hard to see, you have a bleeder screw, your brake line, and you have two bolts up here. So the easiest way to do is take this bleeder screw out first. You can break your line loose, and then you can take these two 10mm bolts out, and this wheel cylinder will just slide right out. And putting your new one back in, it's going to be the reverse of that. So guys, don't let this stuff scare you, because if you can take stuff apart, you can do this kind of stuff. Now, keep in mind I did have this stuff loose before, and you may need to spray some penetrating oil and let it soak on your brake lines and stuff like that. So that's why my car is a lot easier to take apart. Now, I usually do stuff with non-rust belt vehicles. This car itself, while not inherently super rusty, it does have a little case of the crusties. So sometimes this stuff don't come apart quite as easily as it would on a car that would be native here to Southeast Tennessee. So got our line loose. It's not all the way off. But now I'm going to take these two bolts loose up here. And I don't know if you can see in the camera, but we got brake fluid dripping, and I've got a towel on the ground to catch it. Now, keep in mind, I'm also going to put a master cylinder in this. And if you didn't have a lot of brake fluid and you didn't have a lot of money, you wouldn't want to try to take that line out and cap it with a rubber plug or something along that lines to keep from losing your fluid. So got our old wheel cylinder off here, got our new one here, and I'm going to take this bleeder screw out of the new one. And get our new wheel cylinder set up in here and our line started. And once our line started, I'm going to screw it all the way in there with my fingers until it's snug. I want to hurry up and get these two top bolts back in. Get them tightened up. Just like so. And we're going to get our line tightened up. And that line does not have to be ungodly tight, just good and snug. If it is not tight enough to create a seal from your initial tightening, you can always go back and tighten it some more. The wonderful thing about wheel cylinders is most of the time they'll pretty much self-bleed, guys. If you have a good healthy brake system, by the time you get everything hooked up here, you should have fluid dripping out of the bleeder screw. And at that point, you can take and squeeze this wheel cylinder in and tighten your bleeder screw up. And most of the time, that'll get 99% of the air out of the brake system for just doing wheel cylinders. So I'm still going to bleed these brakes, but for an initial, that helps a whole bunch. So at this point, we need to clean our backing plate the best we can. And I'm just going to spray it with a little brake cleaner because I'm not worried about making a show car. We're just making a good driver out of this car. So I'm just going to kind of spray everything off lightly. And I'm going to take half of this towel and I'm just going to come in here and wipe the spindle off and clean that old wheel bearing grease off of it. And wipe around in here a little bit. If you don't have brake cleaner, you don't like using it, you could also use a water-based degreaser and a water hose to do this, because brake fluid, guys, pretty much washes off with water. Because it's hydroscopic, it attaches itself to the water itself. So pretty much wheel cylinders installed. Now we're ready for some brake shoes. And alright guys, got my new shoes laid out, and I did get a new brake hardware kit. It's always a good idea to replace your brake hardware because over time those springs do wear out. But the most important thing you can do when doing drum brakes is sit your old shoe on top of your new one and make sure that they match up. As you can see, these shoes are exactly the same. Both these shoes are the same thickness, and there is not a long or short shoe. So let's get to installing this stuff. And the other nice thing is it comes with a new adjuster spring also, and I am going to go ahead and replace that. So let's get busy. So let's start off with this adjuster spring. So basically, guys, we're just going to remove this spring just like, you know, like we have all the rest of them. So I'm just going to grab it, pull it, and off it comes. So, you know, grab, pull, off. And our new one's going to go on exactly the same way. We're just going to grab it down here on this little tail and hook it around the top up here. Just like so. And another helpful tip, especially on these kind of brake shoes right here, is to reset your adjuster all the way down. That will help you get it all back together in here. So now that's done, there's one thing we need to do before we put shoes on it, and that's going to be to apply some kind of lubricant to these 3 points right here. And I like to put some down here on the bottom also. So what I like to use is anti-seize. You can use any kind of synthetic brake lube or anything of that sort. You just want to make sure that them shoes are able to move freely. Because when you mash the brakes, your brake shoes move in and out. you know, not quite to this extreme, but they do move. And any kind of buildup and rust and nasty stuff in these areas, it's going to harm that movement. So, got my anti-seize. I've had this stuff for probably 10 years, and this is what I use it for 90% of the time. You don't have to glob this stuff on there, because if you glob it on there, it's going to come off and get on your brake surface. But it will help lubricate these points where your shoes touch, and in the grand scheme of things, they won't hurt anything. I also like to put a little on my parking brake arm on the back side where it contacts the shoe, just to help out there. Now, the only thing my hardware kit didn't come with was that new clip for the parking brake. So I'm going to reuse the old one for that. And that's the important part about it. Sometimes, guys, you got to take this stuff off without damaging it, because sometimes if you damage it, you may not be able to get a new part or not have a new part. So pretty much, we got our parking brake guy up on there. And you notice I'm not putting the shoe on the car. There's a reason for that. Because I'm going to put these shoes together before I get to that point. So, and this is the point where it makes it a ton easier, especially when you're using tools like I am, to get this stuff put back together, guys. So, move this camera back just a little bit and widen this view. But it really helps when dealing with this spring right here. As you can tell, it's got outward legs. Now, these are almost impossible to pull once you get the shoes on the car. So what I like to do, I will do it this way, and it just makes it a lot easier. Because just pretty much just like that. And you may have to compress your wheel cylinder pistons a little bit. You pretty much got your shoes hung back on your car, and no fighting with that spring. Now, you may have some fighting with your wheel cylinder, and that's going to be normal. But guys, not really nothing nobody can handle. So, this is a lot easier on a lift or something like that. But maybe you don't have the money for a lift. So I try to make these videos like you would do them at home. So basically, you just see me install that. Well, your one on the back side has a little clip right here on the back side, and this back side clip slides around your shoe. So you need to make sure it's in there. So I'll stick my new pin in from the back, and I'll push it through pretty much straight up and down, guys, like this. And then I'll take this flathead screwdriver, and I'll push this little clip in, and most of the time it'll all push through easily. And sometimes you get one kind of like this that wants to fight on occasion for whatever reason. But don't let that stuff get you down. Sometimes it's new hardware, sometimes it's just, you know, something you're doing and not doing right. So that's fighting a little more than usual. I'm going to take a look here and compare it with my old one, and it looks the same. So now it's time to kind of back up and see what I'm doing wrong. Because now that I know that our parts are the same, sometimes you just don't hold your mouth right. And if you get frustrated, you just kind of step back and go over it. But got that clip on there now, and that just leaves one spring, guys, and we're done putting the brake shoes on. So that's going to be our bottom spring here. And this is why it's important to take pictures of your stuff where you take it apart. That way you have a reference. But pretty much, guys, right there, the brake shoes are installed. So at this point, we need to prepare our brake drum. And your adjuster right here, if you've happened to pull it out some, go ahead and compress that little feller all the way back. And that'll be to its maximum travel. So, brake shoes on. And probably, guys, the most scary part of this for most of y'all will probably be changing wheel bearings. Now, as you can see, I bought new wheel bearings to put in these. There is a difference in inner and outer. And as you can see there is a diameter difference. Well, your outer goes in your outer towards where the wheel bolts up. And your inner goes in here, just like this right here. Now, there's a couple different ways you can go about putting these in. And the first one is you can lightly tap it along this outer ring to seat it. Option B, they sell a bearing and race driver at like Harbor Freight for pretty cheap, or you can get it at your local power store as a Lona tool. I use something like this and a larger hammer that fits the outer race, and I'll tap these things in here. So it's up to you how you decide you want to do it. The big thing is you do not want to put any force on this inner race. That will damage the little ball bearings in here. So you can also put a heavy block of wood on it and tap it in that way with a hammer. It's up to you how you want to do it. You could even use a press. So I'm going to get these wheel bearings in here, guys, and I'll be back. And alright, guys, got the inner wheel bearing in, as you can see down there. Another helpful tip that's going to save you in the long run is to get you some good high temp wheel bearing grease and put it inside your drum here. Now, you don't want to glob this in here, but enough to get in there and keep these bearings lubricated over time will help a ton. So basically, you got a sealed side of the bearing and an open side. Your open side is going to go towards the inside. And I always like to add a little bit of grease to these. These are very well packed bearings, which these are a national bearing. So they're not a real cheap brand. But just a little extra grease can go a long ways, especially in these situations with these small cars. So I got her bearing in her drum there. I'm going to get this outer bearing pressed in there, and I'll be back. So at this point, you're ready to put your drum back on. Now what I like to do, I'll spray out the inside of my brake drum with a little brake cleaner wiped off with a towel. There is a little bit of oil to keep the drum from rusting. You do not have to do that. The oil will burn off. Not necessarily the right way to do it, but as you notice, I'm missing something. Now, if you're real sharp, you'll notice I didn't put no lug studs on it. Well, I'm going to have to. I just wanted to show y'all how this was supposed to slide together. Yeah. So sometimes you'll do stuff like this just to show you there. And our grease had grabbed a hold of our spindle and suctioned our drum on there. So the easiest thing to do, guys, would be to buy 8 new wheel studs and, press those into your drums. Well, I went to the local parts store. All they had in stock was 1. So we got to get at least 7 out without damaging them. This car's already got 1 bad stud, and I'm hoping to use that 1 stud that I have, for the bad one. So there's a couple different ways you can get these lug studs out. I have seen people screw lug nuts on them, beat them out with a hammer. You probably get about a 50% success rate with that. Alternately, remember that block of wood I recommended earlier? That's probably going to be your easiest way. Now, you're not going to be able to do this with a softwood block, but you do need something kind of dense. Flip around and I'll show you. Well guys, after finding I did not have a block of wood hard enough to actually accomplish this, because these studs are pressed in here pretty good. If you're going to knock your studs out with a hammer, make sure you screw that thing down on there a good amount, because you've got pretty much one hit here guys, and you want to hit this thing square. And if you hit it square and your lug nuts threaded on there far enough, you will not damage these studs when you take them off. And that's the most important thing. So basically you just want one good hit. Sometimes it takes two. I don't ever like to hit them on that second time, because most of the time you're going to have damage. So that's not the case here. It's just that piece of wood that I tried to knock these out with before. Got a little bit in the threads. And it's a little bit sharper on the end than what I thought, because these old lug nuts are in pretty poor shape where somebody has ripped the stainless steel caps off of them. So I'll be back here in a moment. Alright guys, after fighting with that way longer than I wanted to, here's our stud. It's not damaged. It was just where I tried to knock it out with a block of wood. It had a little wood into the threads. And this lug nut is kind of sharp along the edge right here. I don't know if you can see it, but it's still got a piece of stainless steel cap on it. That don't make it too fun to, you know, grab hold of with your fingers. So if you don't get that out in 1 to 2 good flat hits there guys, you really need to back up and evaluate your situation. So I got all 4 studs out without damage. I am, just for the sake of it, I am going to go over here and run a die over them just to clean them up a little bit, and I'll come back and I'll show you how to get them into your new drum. And alright guys, sometimes when you buy cheap stuff, you get cheap quality. I clean these lug studs up, and as you can see, there's no damage to the knurl at all. Well, our new drums are machined too large for our lug studs, so they literally just, you know, fall in the hole. Well, at this point, if you'd bought your stuff from a local parts store instead of being cheap like me and buying the $12 drums off of Rock Auto, you wouldn't be in this situation. So there's a couple different ways you can repair this. The first one, you can take a sharp punch and go around here in about 4 to 6 spots and peen around the edge, and that will tighten that hole up. And then you can tap your studs in. If you get an electric glue gun, aka a welder, you could weld these studs in here, and just remember to get you a new set of studs when you replace the drums the next time. And that's about your only options, guys, because you can't glue these things in here because they'll spin and then you'll never get your wheel off. So I'm going to try the punch method first, and we'll see what happens. And if that doesn't prove to be a fix here, we're going to, you know, electric glue gun them in there. Because, you know, what do you got to lose at this point? And alright guys, what I done, I just took a sharp punch and I peened around this hole enough where this stud was a good snug fit in here. And while it's not as tight of a press fit as the factory, I cannot push these 3 that I done out with my fingers. So, got one left. So, I'm going to get that one done and I'll be back. Hopefully, you won't run into this issue. Alright guys, all 4 of them studs are in there. As you say, I can't knock them out of my hand. While these things do not have to be retained with an ungodly amount of press, you want to make sure that they're going to stay tight enough that you can tighten and loosen your wheels. Always check your drums first, or just go ahead and order you 8 new lug studs. So basically guys, instead of just cramming this nut down and ramming it with a bunch of torque, I like to just tap it back down to about the point where it was. That way it rotates free and smooth. There is a torque spec for these, and you can find them in your factory service manual. This is just what I do. I run this thing back down there until our slot line back up for our lock tab. I'm just going to take the same punch that I use for lug stud holes. I'm just going to tap this little guy back down in there. Just enough to keep it from backing off if it catches. So, since we put our bearings in there the correct way this time, and we don't have an open bearing towards the outside, I'm going to clean out our dust cap and our nut and our washer and tap it like that. Well, at this point, you're probably wondering, well, you didn't adjust the brake shoes. And you would be correct. Now, these are technically a self-adjusting shoe on these. Pretty much the first time you hit the brakes, that ratchet adjuster is going to come out, and it's going to adjust the brakes for you guys. Now, there may be some cases where you may have to take this back apart and tighten it up a little bit if it does not adjust to your likings. But for a preliminary use, you're now done with your brakes, and you would just install your wheel and go from there. Now, I have a bunch of other suspension pieces to replace under here, so I'm going to get to doing that. And, you know, the other side is going to be exactly the same as this side. It's just going to be a mirror image, meaning everything will be kind of backwards over there. So hopefully this video will help somebody that may be scared to do the drum brakes on their own. It's generally not a big deal, guys. Sometimes you have stuff throw you curveballs like in lug studs. But sometimes you have to find a workaround. And that's part of working on cars. Sometimes everything's not machine perfect and everything just don't work out wonderful and great when you're doing this kind of stuff. So at this point, when you replace your wheel cylinder and stuff, this is when you want to grab a buddy, bleed that brake before you put your wheel on. But pretty much, guys, that's pretty much all there is to it. It's not some scary, mythical, evil thing. It's, you know, just a drum brake. And a lot of your little small Japanese cars like Hondas and Toyotas and stuff, they use a real similar setup. So, if you like this video or you found anything useful, make sure you hit that like button. I do Geo Metro DIY videos from time to time. They're in their own album on my page. So make sure you hit that subscribe button also, and I'll see you at the next one. Thanks for watching.